Rosa, you're here to empty trash cans, not fill our heads with nonsense. Know your place." Senior partner William Hartwell's words sliced through the marble conference room like a blade. The dozen lawyers around the mahogany table shifted uncomfortably, but none spoke up. Rosa Washington's hands trembled as she clutched her father's worn leather music book hidden beneath cleaning supplies in her cart. 15 years of emptying their trash, and they still saw her as invisible. "Maybe we should ask the janitor what she knows about toxic waste," Derek Mills chuckled, his Harvard law ring catching the morning light. "Probably more than we think, right, Rosa?" The room erupted in polite laughter. They thought it was a joke. If only they knew. Rosa backed toward the door, her cart rattling against marble floors. Through the windows, Atlanta gleamed in the distance, but she saw only Millerville, Alabama, her poisoned hometown, her father's grave. The place Morrison Chemical had been killing for 20 years. Rosa started, her voice small in the vast room. "Nothing to add here," Hartwell said, already turning away. "We'll handle the legal thinking. You handle the cleaning." In the supply closet, Rosa finally breathed. She opened her father's music book, revealing his careful handwriting between gospel arrangements, water tests, cancer statistics, company memos copied during his shifts at the Morrison plant. His inscriptions stared back at her. "Every voice matters in God's chorus, baby girl. Don't let them silence the song." Reverend Samuel Washington had died believing someone would listen. Someone would care enough to hear the truth he documented for 20 years. Rosa pressed the book to her chest. At home, her 8-year-old daughter Keisha slept fitfully, asthma attacks worsening each month. Keisha needed the insurance this job provided. But 846 other souls in Millerville needed something more. They needed someone to finally tell their story. Outside, the lawyers resumed discussing settlement strategies, reducing her people to numbers on spreadsheets. Rosa tucked the book into her cart and straightened her shoulders. In 3 hours, she'd attend paralegal classes. In 5 hours, she'd collect Keisha from school. In 8 hours, she'd return to clean these offices again. But first, she had a choice to make. The same choice her father faced when Morrison's executives first visited their church with promises and money. The same choice every generation faced when power tried to silence truth. Rosa looked at her hands that scrubbed floors, comforted her sick daughter, and turned legal textbook pages late into the night. Hands her father taught to document injustice, disguised as Sunday music lessons. "Truth is like music," he'd whispered before he died. "It wants to be heard, but someone has to sing it first." Church bells chimed the hour through the building's atrium. The same bells that called her father to service. The same bells now calling her to the most important decision of her life. The song was waiting to be sung. The question was whether Rosa Washington had the voice to sing it. Rosa's ancient Honda coughed to life in the parking garage beneath Hartwell and Associates, its engine echoing off concrete walls like her father's last breaths in the hospital. She gripped the steering wheel, watching lawyers in German cars glide past her toward the exit. Atlanta sprawled before her as she drove through downtown, glass towers reaching toward heaven, while below, the historic Sweet Auburn district held memories of another kind of resistance. Her father had brought her here as a child, pointing to the Ebenezer Baptist Church where Dr. King once preached. "Every voice matters," he'd said then, the same words he'd written in his music book. The community college parking lot was half empty when Rosa arrived for her afternoon paralegal class. She slipped into the back row, her Hartwell and Associates uniform drawing curious glances from younger students in jeans and hoodies. Professor Martinez was discussing environmental law precedents when Rosa's phone buzzed. A text from Keisha's school, "Please call regarding your daughter's breathing episode." Rosa's heart clenched. She stepped into the hallway, fingers trembling as she dialed. "Mrs. Washington, Keisha had another asthma attack during PE. We used her inhaler, but you might want to pick her up early." The drive to Keisha's school blurred past strip malls and traffic lights. Rosa found her daughter in the nurse's office, small and fragile in an oversized chair, her breathing still labored. "I'm okay, Mama," Keisha whispered, but her voice was thin as paper. That evening, Rosa sat beside Keisha's bed, listening to the wheezing that never quite went away. On the nightstand, her father's music book lay open to a page where he documented childhood asthma rates in Millerville, numbers that had doubled since the chemical plant expanded. Her daughter was becoming another statistic. Rosa's phone rang, displaying Aunt Lucille's number from Alabama. "Baby girl, we got news," her aunt's voice crackled through the connection. "Morrison's offering settlements, $500 per family. They want us to sign by Friday." "500?" Rosa's voice rose, then dropped to protect Keisha's sleep. "For 20 years of poisoning?" "Folks are scared, Rosa. Bills are piling up, and that plant's the only work for miles. Half the town's already signed." After hanging up, Rosa opened her father's book to his final entry, written 3 days before he died. "They think we'll take their money and stay quiet. They don't understand. We've been singing freedom songs too long to forget the words now." Rosa traced his handwriting with her finger. Outside her window, the city hummed with late-night traffic, but in the distance, she could hear church bells marking the hour. The same denomination where her father had led choir practice every Sunday, teaching that every voice mattered in God's chorus. She thought about Derek Mill's laughter that morning, about Hartwell's dismissal, about the settlement papers waiting for signatures in Millerville. They expected her people to disappear quietly, to take pennies for their pain and call it justice. But Rosa had spent 15 years learning their language, watching their strategies, understanding their weaknesses. She'd earned a paralegal certificate studying late into nights while Keisha slept. She knew more about environmental law than they suspected. More importantly, she knew what they didn't. Her father hadn't just documented crimes. He'd built a legal case that could change everything. Rosa kissed Keisha's forehead and settled into the chair beside her bed, her father's book open in her lap. Tomorrow would bring another day of invisible servitude, another day of watching lawyers fumble a case they didn't understand. But tonight, she began to plan. The song her father started was far from over. Monday morning brought news that made Rosa's blood run cold. These rural families are probably lying about health impacts for money, Derek Mills declared to the conference room, his voice carrying the casual certainty of inherited privilege. "We need to settle quick and cheap before they get organized." Rosa froze in the doorway, her cleaning cart suddenly feeling like an anchor. Through the glass walls, she watched Derek gesture dismissively at case files that contained her neighbors' names, her childhood friends' medical records, her father's grave. "The pattern's too convenient," Derek continued, adjusting his crimson Harvard tie. "Small town, dying industry, sudden cancer cluster, classic opportunistic litigation." Rosa's hands gripped her cart so tightly her knuckles went white. She thought of her father's funeral 2 years ago, the 4th service that month for someone under 60. Of Mrs. Henderson next door, her garden withered despite decades of green thumbs. Of the stillborn babies no one talked about in church. Opportunistic litigation. That evening, Rosa sat at her kitchen table while Keisha worked on homework, her father's music book spread between grocery store coupons and unpaid bills. She pulled out a pen and carefully wrote on a slip of paper, "Check EPA water standards for methyl chloride compounds in rural Alabama communities 1985 to 2000. She folded the note small and tucked it into her uniform pocket. The next morning, Rosa slipped the note into Derek's case file while emptying his trash. By afternoon, she'd left another. Morrison Chemical internal memo dated 3/15/87 mentions acceptable community tolerance levels for skin irritation. On Wednesday, she left a third note. Childhood leukemia rates in Millerville increased 340% between 1985–1995, correlating with plant expansion. Rosa watched from the hallway as Derek discovered each note, his confident expression gradually shifting to something approaching concern. He showed them to his assistant, then to Hartwell, but dismissed them as some paralegal trying to impress us. If only he knew the paralegal was standing 3 feet away, emptying his wastebasket. Thursday brought a call from Aunt Lucille that shattered Rosa's heart. "They found 3 more tumors in Tommy's brain," her aunt whispered over the phone. "Doctor says maybe 6 months. He's only 32, Rosa. Played football with your cousin Marcus." Rosa sank into her desk chair at the community college library, surrounded by environmental law textbooks. Tommy Williamson. She remembered him as a laughing teenager who'd helped her father repair the church roof. Another name for the list. That night, Rosa spread her father's documentation across her living room floor while Keisha slept. Water test results showing mercury levels 50 times normal. Health department reports that mysteriously disappeared from public records. Internal Morrison Chemical memos her father had copied during his shifts, written in corporate doublespeak that admitted guilt while denying responsibility. "Document everything, Rosa," her father had whispered during those final hospital days. "Truth is like music. It wants to be heard, but someone has to sing it first." Friday morning, Rosa left her boldest note yet. Morrison Chemical knew about groundwater contamination in 1984. Chose profit over people. Evidence exists. This time, Derek didn't just show the note to his assistant, he called a meeting. "Someone with access to our files is feeding us inside information," he announced to the legal team. "I want to know who." Rosa continued mopping the conference room floor, invisible as always, while Derek paced before his colleagues like a prosecutor addressing a jury. "These notes are too specific to be random," he said. "Someone's been watching our case strategy, learning our weaknesses. I want polygraph tests for all support staff." Rosa's mop handle slipped from her sweating palms. Polygraph tests. They'd discover everything. Her paralegal training, her father's documentation, her 15 years of accumulated legal knowledge. Worse, they'd fire her, and Keisha would lose medical coverage just as her breathing problems worsened. But 30 feet away, Derek Mills was describing her community as opportunistic liars while planning to offer them pocket change for 20 years of slow death. Rosa straightened her shoulders and gripped her mop handle like her father once gripped his choir director's baton. Some songs demanded to be sung, regardless of the cost. That afternoon, Rosa attended her paralegal class with new purpose. When Professor Martinez discussed whistleblower protections under environmental law, Rosa took careful notes. When they studied precedents for community advocacy in toxic tort cases, she copied every citation. She called Aunt Lucille from the college parking lot. "Don't sign anything yet," Rosa said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I think I might know a way." "Baby girl, these lawyers say we got no choice. It's $500 or nothing." Rosa looked up at the Atlanta skyline, glass towers reflecting the setting sun like mirrors. Somewhere up there, in one of those towers, Derek Mills was planning to cheat her people out of justice. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed the cleaning lady couldn't read. "Give me 1 week, Aunt Lucille, 1 week to try something." That night, Rosa sat beside Keisha's bed, listening to her daughter's labored breathing and reading her father's final entry for the 100th time. "They think we'll take their money and stay quiet. They don't understand. We've been singing freedom songs too long to forget the words now." Rosa closed the book and made her decision. Tomorrow, she would stop hiding in the shadows. Tomorrow, she would step into the light and let her voice be heard. The polygraph examiner arrived Tuesday morning like a harbinger of Rosa's worst fears. Rosa watched from the supply closet as he set up his equipment in Hartwell's office, black cables snaking across mahogany like electronic tentacles designed to strangle secrets. By noon, 3 custodial workers had already been tested. By 2 o'clock, they'd cleared the kitchen staff. Her turn was coming. Derek Mills stalked the halls like a predator, his usual smugness replaced by something darker. Rosa overheard him on the phone with someone he called Dad. "I know what you went through with those environmental cases," Derek said, his voice tight with frustration. "I won't let another firm get burned by community activists making false claims." Rosa paused outside his office, her cleaning supplies forgotten. Through the crack in the door, she saw Derek holding a faded photograph. A distinguished older man in a courtroom, shaking hands with corporate executives. Morrison Chemical hired the best lawyers money could buy back then, Derek continued. If they lost that case in Louisiana, it was because they ignored community testimony. I won't make the same mistake. I'll crush this before it starts. The photograph slipped from Derek's fingers, and Rosa caught a glimpse of the caption. Charles Mills III successfully defends Apex Industries against environmental lawsuit, 1992. Understanding hit Rosa like cold water. Derek wasn't just protecting his career, he was protecting his father's legacy. His dismissal of her community wasn't casual racism, it was learned behavior, passed down like a family heirloom. That afternoon, Maria Santos knocked softly on the supply closet door. "Rosa, can we talk?" Maria was the only lawyer who'd ever bothered learning Rosa's name, the only one who said good morning instead of looking through her like glass. Now she stood in the doorway, her usual confidence replaced by something that looked like concern. "I know what Derek's doing with the polygraphs," Maria said quietly, "and I know you've been leaving those notes." Rosa's blood turned to ice. "I don't know what you mean." "My grandmother died from asbestos exposure in Puerto Rico," Maria continued, ignoring Rosa's denial. "Company lawyers claimed it was natural causes. They used the same tactics Derek's using now. Discredit the community, minimize the evidence, settle cheap and fast." Rosa studied Maria's face, searching for signs of a trap. But what she saw was recognition, one woman's pain acknowledging another's. "You're from the community Morrison Chemical poisoned, aren't you?" Maria asked. The question hung between them like a bridge Rosa could either cross or burn. She thought of her father's warning about trusting outsiders, about lawyers who promised help but delivered betrayal. But she also thought of Tommy Williamson's brain tumors, of Keisha's worsening asthma, of 846 people running out of time. "Millerville, Alabama," Rosa whispered. "My father documented everything for 20 years before the chemicals killed him." Maria's eyes widened. "You have documentation?" Rosa led Maria to her car in the parking garage, away from the building's listening ears. In the Honda's cramped front seat, she opened her father's music book for the first time to someone outside her family. Page after page of evidence spilled out, water tests hidden between hymns, cancer statistics tucked behind song lyrics, internal Morrison Chemical memos copied during her father's night shifts at the plant. "Jesus," Maria breathed, studying a memo dated 1987. They knew the water was contaminated and kept operating anyway. "My father was more than a janitor," Rosa said quietly. "He was a choir director, but he was also the unofficial town historian. He knew what documentation would hold up in court." Maria looked up from the book, her expression shifting from surprise to something approaching awe. "This isn't just evidence, Rosa. This is a smoking gun. Why haven't you—" "Because I empty trash cans," Rosa interrupted, her voice bitter. "Because I wear a uniform that makes me invisible. Because even if I tried to tell them, who would believe the cleaning lady over Harvard Law? That evening, Rosa received the call she'd been dreading. "Polygraph scheduled for tomorrow at 9, Derek's assistant informed her. "Please report to Mr. Hartwell's office." Rosa hung up and stared at her reflection in the kitchen window. Behind her, Keisha practiced piano, struggling through amazing grace with the determined concentration of a child who inherited her grandfather's love of music, but not his natural talent. "I was lost, but now am found," Keisha sang softly, her young voice pure and clear. Rosa opened her father's book to his final letter, the one she'd found tucked behind the last page like a message in a bottle. "Rosa, baby girl, if you're reading this, it means the time has come to sing the song we've been rehearsing. They'll try to silence you with fear, with threats, with the weight of all you have to lose. But remember what I taught you. Every voice matters in God's chorus, and sometimes the solo has to come from the back row. Don't let them tell you where you belong. Your voice carries all our voices now. Make them listen. Make them hear. Make them remember that we were here, and we mattered, and we fought back. The music doesn't end with me, baby girl. It grows louder. Love, Daddy." Rosa closed the book and made her decision. She wouldn't wait for the polygraph to expose her. Tomorrow morning, she would walk into that conference room and tell them exactly who she was and what she knew. It was time to stop hiding in the chorus. It was time for her solo. Wednesday morning brought news that changed everything. "Morrison Chemical's CEO is flying in tomorrow," Hartwell announced to the emergency partners meeting. "Richard Morrison wants this case closed before it attracts media attention." Rosa paused outside the conference room, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the glass, she watched Derek spread files across the table with the confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards. "We settle fast and quiet," Derek said. "500 per family. Take it or leave it. Morrison's giving us 24 hours to make it happen." 24 hours. Rosa's knees nearly buckled. By Thursday evening, her community would either have justice or surrender forever. EPA regulations required that once a settlement was signed, future legal action became nearly impossible. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maria. "Emergency meeting, back stairwell, now." Rosa found Maria pacing in the empty stairwell, her usual composure cracked like thin ice. "I researched your father's documentation all night," Maria said, holding up a thick folder. "Rosa, this isn't just evidence, it's a constitutional case. Morrison Chemical didn't just poison water. They systematically targeted a low-income black community because they thought no one would fight back." Rosa gripped the handrail. "What does that mean?" "It means environmental racism, federal protection, class action status." Maria's eyes blazed with the fervor of someone who'd found her calling. "Your father didn't just document crimes, he built a civil rights case." "But I'm scheduled for polygraph at 9. "Forget the polygraph." Maria pulled out a legal document. "I found a state law requiring community notification before environmental settlements. As a resident of the affected area, you have the right to address any settlement meeting." Rosa stared at the statute, its formal language swimming before her eyes. "They'll never let me speak." "They have to. It's law." Maria gripped Rosa's shoulders. "I'll cite the statute. You present your father's evidence. We turn their quiet settlement into a public reckoning." That evening, Rosa sat at her kitchen table arranging her father's documentation like he'd taught her to arrange choir music, building from quiet truth to thunderous revelation. Water tests, health records, internal memos. The story of Millerville's slow death told in corporate letterhead and medical statistics. Keisha watched from the doorway, her inhaler clutched in small hands. "Mama, why are you crying?" Rosa wiped her eyes, unaware tears had fallen. "I'm not crying, baby. I'm practicing." "Practicing what?" "A song your grandfather taught me." At midnight, Rosa called Aunt Lucille. "Don't sign anything tomorrow. I'm coming to Atlanta to speak for us."
"Baby girl, you sure about this? These lawyers don't play fair."
Rosa looked at her father's music book, open to his final entry. "Neither do we, Aunt Lucille. Neither do we." Thursday morning arrived gray and cold, autumn wind rattling the windows of Hartwell and Associates like nervous applause. Rosa dressed carefully, her best black dress, her father's small gold cross, her mother's pearl earrings. Armor for battle. In the elevator, Derek Mills glanced at her with mild curiosity. "No polygraph today, Rosa. We rescheduled." "I know," Rosa said quietly. Something in her tone made him look closer, but the doors opened before he could speak. The conference room buzzed with expensive suits and nervous energy. Morrison Chemical executives clustered at one end of the mahogany table like generals planning siege. Environmental lawyers shuffled papers with the resigned efficiency of soldiers preparing to surrender. Rosa slipped inside, her father's music book pressed against her chest like a shield. Richard Morrison commanded the room's attention. Silver-haired, sharp-suited, radiating the casual arrogance of a man who'd bought his way out of every problem he'd ever faced. "Gentlemen," Morrison began, "let's conclude this unpleasantness quickly. 500 per family, no admission of guilt, sealed settlement. Everyone wins." Actually, Maria Santos stood from her chair near the window. "We have a procedural matter first." The room turned toward her with the collective irritation of people whose time was money. State Environmental Code requires community notification before toxic tort settlements. A representative from the affected area has requested to address this meeting. Derek's face went pale. "Maria, what are you—" "Rosa Washington, representing the community of Millerville, Alabama." Rosa stepped forward, her legs somehow steady despite the earthquake in her chest. 20 pairs of eyes focused on her with expressions ranging from confusion to outright hostility. Morrison barely glanced up from his papers. "I'm sorry, but we're here for legal proceedings, not—" "I am a legal proceeding," Rosa said, her voice carrying the quiet authority her father had used to silence unruly choirs. "My name is Rosa Washington. My father was Reverend Samuel Washington, and for 20 years he documented every crime your company committed against my community." She opened his music book and began to sing her father's song. "Water contamination began in March 1985, Rosa said, her voice steady as she placed her father's first document on the conference table. "Morrison Chemical expanded operations without upgrading filtration systems. My father documented mercury levels 50 times EPA standards." Richard Morrison's pen stopped moving. Derek Mills leaned forward, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Childhood leukemia rates increased 340% between 1985 and 1995, Rosa set down another paper. "Brain cancers in adults under 40 jumped 600%. My father kept every death certificate, every medical record, every EPA complaint that mysteriously disappeared from public files." "This is highly irregular," Morrison snapped, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Rosa continued as if he hadn't spoken, arranging evidence like her father had taught her, building the song verse by verse. "Internal memo dated March 15, 1987. She placed the document where everyone could see Morrison Chemical letterhead. Quote, "Acceptable community tolerance levels for skin irritation and respiratory distress will allow continued operation without costly filtration upgrades." The room fell silent, except for papers rustling and someone's sharp intake of breath. "You," Rosa said, looking directly at Richard Morrison, "you knew our children were getting sick, and you calculated how much suffering you could cause before we'd fight back." Derek Mills found his voice. "Where did you get internal company documents?" "My father worked night shifts at your plant for 15 years. He cleaned your offices, emptied your trash, listened to your meetings. He knew you'd eventually be held accountable, so he documented everything." Rosa opened her father's book to reveal 20 years of meticulous record-keeping, pages that looked like gospel music, but contained water test results, health statistics, and copied memos proving systematic environmental racism. 847 people live in Millerville, Rosa continued, her voice growing stronger. 63 have died from cancers directly linked to mercury and methyl chloride exposure. 42 children suffer from respiratory diseases that didn't exist before 1985. My 8-year-old daughter has asthma that gets worse every year. She paused, letting the numbers sink in. And you want to pay us $500 each to disappear quietly? Maria Santos stood. Rosa has paralegal certification and 15 years of environmental law observation. Her father's documentation follows EPA protocols exactly. This evidence would hold up in any federal court. Morrison's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but Morrison waved him away. Miss Washington, Morrison said, his tone shifting to something resembling respect. Assuming this documentation is authentic, what outcome would satisfy your community? Rosa had prepared for this moment through hundreds of late-night study sessions and thousands of hours listening to these lawyers plan strategies. Medical monitoring for every Millerville resident, environmental cleanup to EPA standards, community health center with specialists for chemical exposure, and compensation that reflects 20 years of stolen lives. That could cost, Morrison's lawyer began. $30 million, Rosa finished, less than your company spends on advertising each quarter. Derek Mills stared at her with something approaching amazement. How do you know our quarterly advertising budget? Because I've been listening to your phone calls for 15 years, Rosa replied. You talk like we don't exist, like we can't hear, like we don't matter. You forgot that invisible people see everything. Richard Morrison closed his folder and studied Rosa with the calculating gaze of a man reassessing a chessboard. You've been planning this for a long time. My father was planning this for 20 years. I'm just finishing his song.
The room buzzed with urgent conversations. Lawyers conferring, executives calculating costs, EPA representatives taking notes. Rosa stood at the center of it all, no longer invisible, no longer silent. For the first time in her life, they were listening. Morrison called for a 30-minute recess. As the room emptied, Derek Mills approached Rosa, his earlier arrogance replaced by something that looked like humility. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. I judged your community without understanding the facts. That was wrong. Rosa nodded. Your father lost a case like this in Louisiana, didn't he? Derek's eyes widened. How did you? Because I listen, Rosa said, and because my father taught me that understanding your opponent is the first step toward justice. As Derek walked away, Rosa felt her father's presence in the quiet conference room. She could almost hear his voice humming "Wade in the Water," the spiritual that had guided slaves to freedom, now guiding his daughter toward justice. The song was far from over. But for the first time, Rosa believed it might have a happy ending. When the meeting reconvened, Richard Morrison had reinforcements. 3 environmental lawyers from Morrison Chemical's crisis management team, armed with briefcases and skeptical expressions. Miss Washington, the lead attorney began, while we appreciate your community perspective, unsubstantiated claims won't hold up in federal court. Rosa opened her father's music book to its final section, pages she'd saved for this moment. Morrison Chemical Internal Environmental Audit completed January 1984, she said, placing the document on the table. 18 months before operations began in Millerville. Quote, proposed Alabama site lacks adequate groundwater protection. Recommend alternative location to minimize legal exposure. The corporate lawyers went rigid. Your company chose Millerville because you thought poor black folks wouldn't fight back, Rosa continued. You calculated that our lives were worth less than relocation costs.
Morrison's face darkened. Those documents are proprietary. These documents are evidence of environmental racism, Maria Santos interrupted, standing beside Rosa. Deliberate targeting of a vulnerable community violates federal civil rights law. Derek Mills surprised everyone by supporting Rosa. The evidence is comprehensive. Morrison Chemical knew about contamination risks and proceeded anyway. The lead corporate attorney launched a desperate counterattack. Miss Washington lacks scientific training to interpret environmental data. Her father was a janitor, not a researcher. This documentation could be fabricated. I have a paralegal certificate and 15 years of environmental law study, Rosa replied calmly. My father followed EPA testing protocols exactly. And these aren't photocopies. They're original company documents with Morrison Chemical watermarks.
She placed her hands on her father's book. My father taught me that justice has its own rhythm. You can try to rush it, delay it, or silence it, but eventually the truth finds its voice. Richard Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying Rosa with reluctant admiration. What guarantees do we have that this settles all claims? None, Rosa said firmly, because justice isn't something you buy once and own forever. If you continue poisoning communities, we'll continue fighting back. The room buzzed with urgent whispers. Morrison's lawyers huddled around him, their confident facade cracking under the weight of Rosa's evidence. Finally, Morrison raised his hand for silence. Miss Washington, your documentation is compelling. We're prepared to discuss a comprehensive settlement addressing your community's concerns. Rosa felt her father's spirit in that moment, 20 years of patient documentation finally bearing fruit. Medical monitoring for all residents, environmental cleanup to exceed EPA standards, community health center, $50 million in damages. Rosa's voice carried the authority of someone who'd earned the right to demand justice. The number hit the room like thunder. 50 million, 100 times Morrison's insulting original offer. Morrison's face went pale, but he didn't refuse outright. That's significant. So were 20 years of stolen lives, Rosa replied. Derek Mills cleared his throat. Given the strength of the evidence and potential federal civil rights violations, 50 million seems reasonable. Even Maria looked surprised by Derek's complete transformation from adversary to advocate. Morrison requested another recess, but this time his body language had changed. The swagger was gone, replaced by the careful posture of a man who knew he'd lost. As lawyers filed out for urgent phone calls with corporate headquarters, Rosa remained at the conference table, her father's book open before her. Derek approached hesitantly. My father always said environmental cases were career killers, but he was wrong, wasn't he? They're conscience builders. Rosa nodded. Your father was protecting what he thought mattered. Now you're protecting what actually does. Through the conference room windows, Atlanta's skyline stretched toward the horizon, glass towers built on foundations of ambition and compromise. But somewhere beyond those towers, in a small Alabama town, 846 people were waiting to hear whether their lives finally mattered. Rosa touched her father's inscription one last time. Every voice matters in God's chorus. The chorus was about to get much louder. 2 hours later, Richard Morrison returned to the conference room with the defeated posture of a man who'd run out of options. Morrison Chemical accepts your terms, he announced quietly. $50 million in damages, comprehensive medical monitoring, environmental cleanup, and community health center. We'll also issue a public statement acknowledging our failure to adequately protect the Millerville community. Rosa felt 20 years of her father's patient hope crystallize into this single moment of justice. When? She asked. Cleanup begins within 60 days. Medical monitoring starts immediately. The health center will be operational within 18 months. Derek Mills leaned forward. And future protections?
Morrison's lawyer answered reluctantly. Morrison Chemical will establish an environmental justice review board for all future facility locations. Community representatives will have veto power over projects affecting their areas. Rosa closed her father's music book, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what they'd achieved. $50 million. Medical care for everyone in Millerville. Clean water for the first time in 20 years. But more than that, acknowledgement that her people mattered. "There's one more thing," Rosa said, standing as the lawyers began packing their briefcases. "I want to work on the implementation." Hartwell spoke for the first time in hours. "Rosa, given your expertise in this matter, we'd like to offer you a senior paralegal position with our Environmental Justice Division." "Full-time?" Rosa asked. "Full-time, with benefits and law school tuition assistance if you're interested." Rosa thought of Keisha, whose asthma attacks could finally be treated by specialists, of her neighbors in Millerville who would have clean water for the first time in decades, of her father who'd spent 20 years building toward this moment. "I accept." That evening, Rosa drove through Atlanta's traffic with different eyes. The city's glass towers no longer seemed like monuments to exclusion. They were simply buildings where people worked, where justice could be found if you knew how to look for it. At home, Keisha was practicing piano, her breathing easier than it had been in months. "Mama, why are you smiling so big?" Rosa sat beside her daughter on the piano bench. "Remember how Granddaddy used to say, 'Every voice matters'? In God's chorus," Keisha recited. "Today, our voice helped change things for a lot of people." Rosa opened her father's music book and showed Keisha the inscription. "Your granddaddy spent his whole life getting ready for today. He taught me how to document injustice, how to organize evidence, how to speak truth to power. Are you going to teach me?" Rosa smiled. "I'm going to teach you to use your voice for justice, but I'm also going to make sure you grow up in a world where you never have to fight as Granddaddy and I did." 2 weeks later, Rosa sat in her new office at Hartwell & Associates. Not a supply closet, but a real office with windows overlooking the city. Her father's music book sat on her desk beside legal textbooks and environmental case studies. Derek Mills knocked on her doorframe. "Ready for the Millerville site visit?" Their partnership still felt surreal. The Harvard lawyer who'd once dismissed her community now worked alongside her to implement the cleanup plan. His transformation wasn't complete, but it was genuine. "Derek," Rosa said as they walked toward the elevator, "what changed your mind about environmental justice work?" He was quiet for a moment. "Watching you fight for people you love made me realize I'd been fighting for the wrong things my whole career. My father lost his case because he forgot that real people lived behind the legal briefs." At Millerville, Rosa watched Morrison Chemical engineers test soil samples while her neighbors looked on with cautious hope. Aunt Lucille approached, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Baby girl, they're really going to clean it up?" "Every drop of contaminated water," Rosa promised, "every inch of poisoned soil." That night, Rosa and Derek stood in Millerville's small cemetery, where her father was buried alongside 62 other victims of Morrison Chemical's greed. "He would be proud," Derek said simply. Rosa placed fresh flowers on her father's grave and opened his music book one final time. The setting sun caught the pages, illuminating 20 years of careful documentation that had finally achieved its purpose. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered. "The song is finished." But even as she said the words, Rosa knew they weren't true. Her father's song wasn't finished. It was just beginning to spread to other communities, other fights, other voices that had been waiting too long to be heard. The chorus was getting louder indeed. 6 months later, Rosa Washington stood before a packed auditorium at Atlanta Community College, her father's music book resting on the podium beside her law school acceptance letter. "Environmental justice begins with documentation," she told the crowd of paralegals, community activists, and law students. "My father taught me that truth is like music. It wants to be heard, but someone has to sing it first." In the front row, Keisha sat beside Derek Mills, both listening intently as Rosa explained how ordinary people could build extraordinary cases. Keisha's asthma had disappeared completely since moving away from polluted Millerville. Derek had left corporate law entirely, now heading Hartwell and Associates' Environmental Justice Division. "Your voices matter," Rosa continued, touching her father's book. "Whether you're a janitor, a teacher, a nurse, or a lawyer, if you see injustice, document it. If you witness suffering, record it. If powerful people tell you to stay quiet, sing louder." After her speech, a young woman approached, Maria Elena Rodriguez, a custodian from a Houston chemical plant. "Miss Washington, my community is getting sick from contaminated groundwater. The company says it's not their fault, but I've been keeping records, just like your father did." Rosa smiled and handed Maria Elena her business card. "Send me everything you have. We'll help you build your case." As the auditorium emptied, Rosa walked outside into the Atlanta evening. Church bells chimed the hour, the same bells that had called her father to service, the same bells that now called her to continue his work. Her phone buzzed with updates from across the country. A textile plant in North Carolina agreeing to clean up after workers organized using Rosa's documentation methods. A mining company in West Virginia facing federal investigation based on community evidence. 3 more environmental justice cases citing the Millerville precedent. The Reverend Samuel Washington Environmental Justice Center would open next month in Rosa's hometown, the first of its kind in rural Alabama. Rosa would teach documentation techniques to community advocates nationwide while completing law school remotely. But tonight, she simply sat on the community college steps where her journey towards justice had begun, her father's music book open in her lap. On the final page, she'd added her own inscription beneath his. "For Keisha and all the voices yet to be heard, the song never ends. It only grows stronger. Love, Mama." Somewhere in the distance, a church choir was practicing Wade in the Water, the same spiritual that had carried her ancestors to freedom, now carrying her father's legacy toward a future where every voice truly mattered. Rosa closed the book and headed home, where Keisha was waiting to practice piano. Tonight, they would work on Amazing Grace, the song about being lost and found, about voices that refuse to be silenced. The song her father started in a small Alabama town had become a symphony of justice echoing across the nation. And Rosa Washington, once invisible, once silenced, now conducted the chorus with the confidence of someone who's learned that the most powerful songs always begin in the back row. The music played on.